Hey, good morning everybody. My name's David Smith and I'm from a company called Risk Consulting Ltd that provides fire protection consultancy. The subject this morning is fire risk assessments. It's a very large subject, so I would ask if there's any questions, can you leave them till the end, because it's going to be very difficult to cover the whole scope of a fire risk assessment within a 10-minute time frame. The law requires under the regulatory reform order that you must have a fire risk assessment if you employ 5 or more persons. Often the ones I've seen are just simple checklists that are not really relevant because they just are tick boxes. When I carry out a fire risk assessment, and this is for a printing company in Hartlepool, it's about 40 pages because it looks and audits every aspect of their business, from which you show an understanding and a knowledge of what they're doing, and as a consequence you can come forward with practical recommendations if there are any deficiencies. So on the basis of the type of report which I personally issue, it has an introduction, it has an overview, it has a risk assessment review followed by recommendations. The introduction more or less explains the legal situation, the people I've met and communicated with, and ultimately the person who is responsible. And that is not the safety manager or anybody that could be fobbed off. It is the most senior person who can be seen to have responsibility. Chairman, managing director, and larger companies it will be the site manager or warehouse. Where's your lightning protection? Oh, we don't have any. We rang the architect, building control didn't ask for it. I'm not interested. I want an evaluation whether that building is exposed to lightning or not. And there is a British standard which tells you how you can actually arrive at that particular answer as to whether it's needed or otherwise. So there's a whole raft of building services that you would look at. The next thing that I would look at is the occupancy and decide, well, what sort of business are you in? And with that, we need to know all the raw materials, all of the plant and machinery. So for instance, one client I've got has plastic injection molding and the hydraulic oil is at a pressure of 1500 psi. So we need to therefore look at the hydraulic oil and see if it's flammable, look at the safety systems they have in terms of that particular machine. We then look at the process flow chart, which I tend to find is very useful. If you draw a picture, you can describe a process, but if you actually draw a picture and you put it into the report, you can actually follow it like a family tree. So we look at the occupancy characteristics right across the board and therefore pull out from that where the particular risk features may be. So having looked at the occupancy, the next thing I do is I look at the combustible fire load. So from all of the previous information, I pull out from those facts, whether they are a fire risk or otherwise, but I pull out those things that can actually cause a fire to spread, and that goes under the area which is combustible contents. The next issue we look at is the risk control features, fire safety measures, and this is quite vast, but obviously because it's fire risk assessment. The risk control measures include a fire protection sprinkler system. Is it adequate? And if it's got water supplies, do they work? Last Tuesday, I went to a site and I was told, oh, the fire pump blew up a couple of weeks ago. And I said, well, last year when I came, I told you it was because the cooling line was jammed. And I immediately stopped testing that engine and said, you must replace that particular solenoid valve. Did they? No. Power cut, and the little bit of equipment they've got that keeps the water pressure up couldn't work. So the water pressure gradually fell, the diesel engine got in, no cooling water, new engine. Probably about £20,000, just for the sake of a little piece of kit. And last Friday, I was in Nottingham, tested a fire pump, and it also failed. But a lot of risk assessments I see on the fire side, sprinkler system, tick. Yes, we've got one. Yeah, but is it correct for the risk? Well, we don't know because they haven't got the skill to know whether it is or not. We then go into fire alarms. You've got manual fire alarms, automatic fire alarms, you've got maintenance, servicing. Is that being done correctly? Are the fire alarms appropriate for the risk? Again, that is an issue to be looked at and often neglected. So fire alarms, you've got emergency lighting, and so many people don't understand emergency lighting. Again, going back to the warehouse, it's a regulation. You must have emergency lighting on the outside of a building. And they're quietly defined in the British Standard, which is BS 6266, that you need lighting on the outside of the building. Same reason, oh, building control didn't ask for it. Not interested. It's a fire risk assessment. You can't go out of a lit building into a dark area. You have to have lights on the outside. There are prescribed forms for maintenance and testing. And they say, oh, yeah, we've done a maintenance and test of the emergency light. Not good enough. It has to be an inspection. There's a prescribed form which says, I have inspected this system and it is compliant. Secondly, it works. So it's not just about testing, it's about inspecting. And from emergency lighting, we go to portable fire extinguishers, maintenance and testing. I had a client in Chadwell Heath, and he has a contract for his fire extinguishers. And I was looking to make sure that they've been served correctly. £200 for one extinguisher. And it just gets a contract, pays it, and it should have been only about £50. Another client, I'll go around, they've got large printing machines. Lo and behold, they've got what we call dry chemical extinguishers. Great, if you put one of those on a machine, the machine's finished. So I went on Friday back to this client, and they've got brand new extinguishers, what we call water mist, which puts out a very fine spray, and as a consequence, if they use that on their machinery, if there's a small fire, it doesn't leave any residual damage. Okay, it may not be a fire risk assessment, but it's a byproduct of giving the client good, solid advice. So we look at the whole range of portable fire appliances. We then come on to evacuation procedures. How are they formed? Are they managed correctly? And there needs to be two categories. You have to have the team, call them fire marshals, who will actually investigate if the fire is genuine, and they have to be trained accordingly. You then have your evacuation personnel who count the people as they're coming out, and you then have a controller. And to back that up, there must be adequate training. So I look at the training records to make sure they have been trained and they understand what they're doing. And then we have a mop-up subject called other contributory features, and that covers waste management, covers the accreditations they've got. So I make sure that they are well up to date. If they've got ISO 9001, 14001, 18001, 14, 28,000, and all those, they're recorded, and I make sure that they're up to date. And in fact, going back on everything else that I've talked about, I look at all the certification to make sure that it is all up to date. And it's amazing how many clients kind of forget. And when the fire risk assessment comes around, they say, gosh, God, our electrical installation needs to be checked. It hasn't been done for 4 years. Well, okay, fine, let's get it done. And off they go. So after that section, we talk about a checklist, and I have a risk assessment review, which is color-coded. A load of questions. Green is you're okay, yellow it's not applicable, and red means action has got to be taken. So effectively, that's the front page. And then we have a selection of questions for which there are answers following the recommended practice from the home HMSO publications. So we have identification of hazards. So for instance, in the middle, I say, are utility supplies, electricity, gas, fuel oil, LPG in the building adequately protected? Yes. But it's already described in the narrative. So this is just a consolidation in a picture form. And then on top of that, I have comments which enhance the information in the checklist. The next part of the checklist is identification of the people who could be at risk. So, for instance, are the self-closers on the fire doors operating correctly? In this one, I've said no, because we needed additional self-closers on doors that were opening onto a fire escape route. Next is evaluation, removal and reduction. So a whole load of questions covering that particular subject. And for instance, where Where emergency escape lighting is installed, is it in a working order and maintained regularly? The answer I put is no, because I put the fire alarm call points are visible, but they're set away from a final exit door. In this instance, you've got to have a push button by your final exit door, and these were 3 meters away. Why? Heaven knows. But they had to relocate them. We then go on to recording, planning, informing, and training. Again, all the issues we've talked about. Have your records correct? Have you provided proper training? And this again is followed up with more enhanced information. Following this, we have a review procedure. And this is where, have there been any risk changes since I last visited? Have you brought in new machinery? Has it been done properly? Have you introduced new flammable liquids? Have you moved flammable liquids out? And so you find nowadays that clients are always on the move. So this review procedure covers buildings, occupancy, fire protection measures, maintenance, and if there's anything changed since I went there last time, that is then recorded. And the final section, of course, are recommendations. And in this particular report, there are 19 recommendations. So from 1 to 19, Steve, give me a number, 1 to 19.
12.
12, okay then. So recommendation number 12 was pallet storage height in the warehouse. In the warehouse, for the finished product, there is an area stacking timber and plastic pallets to a height far above that which the sprinkler system has been designed to protect. They were stored at 5.8 meters high, and we need to look at the adequacy of the sprinkler system for this area, which we know wouldn't cope, or to think of an alternative, because if these were involved in a fire, you would lose the entire premises. So we end up with recommendations, and throughout the report we include photographs and visuals so that people can actually see what I'm referring to. And on that particular sentence, the presentation is closed.
Thank you. What happens when the occupier of the premises is other than the landlord? So who are you doing the report for?
Occupier.
Right. So if they can't get any of those recommendations done because the lease doesn't allow them to do it, what happens then?
There are, in the report, I've got a section which states, have you discussed your fire risk assessment with your employees and everybody else? Have you discussed the fire risk assessment with your landlords? Yes or no? Has your landlord got a fire risk assessment, and have you seen it? If we have an awkward landlord, and I have to say I very rarely have come across that, then the report is a legal document and it can be sent to the landlord, and if there are deficiencies that the landlord won't attend to, the landlord then is legally responsible and will be prosecuted, and people are severely prosecuted for failures. It doesn't hit the newspaper because it's not newsworthy, is it? It's not Brexit, or it's not football, or it's not this, but there are regular fines being administered.
So are you saying that although you just said you made recommendations, are they legally obliged to carry those recommendations out?
They would be ill-advised not to,
Don't know.
because if there was a failure and it was as a result of one of the recommendations not being complied with, then they would be held responsible, because they would look at the fire risk assessment and they'd say, look, you haven't got emergency lighting on the outside. You've had an evacuation and somebody's actually tripped over a cooling agent, a cooling box that's on the outside, sort of air conditioning box, which in the dark they haven't seen, and you haven't complied. Therefore, but if I don't pick it up, then I'm the one who gets challenged. Well, yeah, because it's my document. If I don't...
Do you go back and check that the recommendations have actually, they've listened and they've implemented your recommendations? So all these reports you do you go, is it something that you do on a regular basis and say, last time I was here, these were my recommendations, let's check where you are now?
Yes.
So you go back and you actually check that they have done what you've recommended?
Yes, so the report I completed last night has 2015 recommendations, bracket status. And if a recommendation is completed, I repeat it in the following year's risk assessment, but I repeat it and state in bold print underneath, this recommendation has been completed. And the information about that recommendation is then incorporated in the body of the report.
I guess the insurance company must have some, your insurers will want to see these, don't they?
Often, yes. Yes.
Another question, you talked about outside lighting. Who's responsible? If it isn't there and you've got a premises that's rented, who should be putting it there? Whose responsibility is it? Is it yours or the landlord?
I have a client who provides a product to a dairy, and they are within the dairy's confines of the property. They did not have emergency lighting. The dairy said, we don't think you need it. So the client provided it and then billed the dairy. But they were told quite emphatically that it was a legal responsibility, and their fire risk assessment hadn't picked it up. It was just a simple tick box.
Another question is, you've got fire extinguishers and that kind of thing. How often should they be serviced and things?
Fire extinguishers need to have an annual service, what I call a full service, in the sense of weighing them, making sure that they're not past their use-by date. But then there's an interim service, interim visit, which is more or less just going around and make sure they're in a good condition, where they should be. So a major service once a year, an interim service every 6 months.
I've got one. If you said about if you've got ducting and stuff. So what happens, like, my partner's got a new factory, they've got compressed air that goes around the whole factory and then goes outside or part of it. So how do they have shutters? Should they have shutters in that if there's a fire? How does something like that, or if you've got central, you've got central heating ducts?
That is not of much significant concern, because the size of the actual pipes that have compressed air wouldn't really allow a fire to spread through somewhere. You wouldn't put a fire shutter on that, because you make sure that where it goes through walls, when it goes through walls like your water and your air, you make sure it's fire sealed.
Right.
What I'm thinking of is
Big duct.
a big duct. For instance, there's a client I've got makes blue badges for the people with disability badges, and they've got an air handling unit in the plant room and ducting, which is probably a metre square, that goes through the factory and into this particular room where they do the blue badges, because it has to be held at a certain environmental condition. Now, I've asked the question, is there a fire shutter in that ductwork? Now, it has to be either in the compartment wall, which they've got, or it could be actually in the plant room itself, because a small fire in the air conditioning creates smoke, and then you may not have a fire, but you'll have pollution. Yeah.
So, with regard to a place like Grenfell Tower, who is really responsible?
Everybody. Everybody is responsible for Grenfell Tower, from the top to the person who has neglected to do his job properly. And Grenfell Tower is unbelievable. And it might show the difference between government and local authority and private industry. Private industry, there's no way private industry or any clients I know would use polyethylene as an insulating material. And I recently did a hotel in Romania, which was 30 floors high, and every 2 floors it only had a single skin of metal cladding, and every 2 floors it was compressed with mineral wool, mineral rock wool. And when I was there, I was going to bring the photographs, but I forgot, is actually had the cladding taken off the 2 levels, and there's a big ladder going up where we took the 2nd floor cladding off, just to make sure the mineral wool had been provided. And then I chased with the architects in the buildings to make sure that they could tell me they did it at every level. So yeah, I mean, there's too many questions in Grenfell, but everybody's responsible. It is an absolute disgrace.
You say about a tick boxing,
Yeah.
Is it compulsory to have your sort of
No.
recommendation? So people can just go around and do their own tick boxing, fire assessments.
Yes.
Okay, so why do people call you in then? And it's cheaper the other way around.
Because the fact is they want to discharge their legal obligations and want the job done properly. And
if a tick box is okay, then surely they'll discharge their legal obligation by ticking the boxes.
No, because the ticks have got to be right. And the reason I got into fire risk assessments right at the beginning is that I helped a client with a fire alarm in Newport Pagnell. I went up to their sites in Liverpool. When I got there, the client said, "This is our risk assessment." I went through it. It contained a number of inadequacies. And they said, "We're not very impressed with the guy that came." I said, "Well, look, I'll correct it for you. I'll sign it for you. And therefore, you're clear," because they have not done it properly. You know, yes, you have a fire alarm, but that's not enough. Is the fire alarm compliant? Is it being serviced properly? And the tick box which says, "Have you got a fire alarm?" Yes, tick box. And that was Nampac Plastics, and that was the first involvement I had in fire risk assessments, because they, as a company, wanted to know that that particular obligation at law was being fulfilled in a professional manner. So they're prepared to pay for the proper job. And if you're a Grenfell, you're not. And that's a difference.
So you take on the liability?
Yes,
And
undoubtedly.
But surely people move pallets about, something like that, and the risk assessment has changed instantly as soon as there's any adaptation to anything in terms of, especially in a warehouse environment where people are moving things, putting things in different places. They put pallets down in the wrong place. They can't get to the fire exit. So how can you take the liability for then something like that happens?
The report.
Surely you've only taken liability for exactly when you left that premises, because that's when you know it was working. Anything after that, you don't know what's happened there. You don't know if someone's backed into the.
That is
the
fair
fire
comment.
alarm
Yeah,
or-
George, yeah, that is fair comment. That as the report says in the introduction, this is the site as I find it at the time that I visit it. But in terms of the combustibility of the pallets and moving them, etc. and so forth, I have got a note in the report about the combustible fire load, and I'll have there, we have timber pallets. If it's a warehouse, then we know they're going to be moved around. I then check to make sure they've got a fire safety checklist that they complete every week, and that would contain, are fire doors blocked, is the fire extinguisher there, has the emergency lighting been checked. So they have a fire safety checklist, and I'll check that. And I went to a major warehouse the other day, and the fire doors were blocked by pallets. So yeah, it happened to be the time I was there. They were moved immediately. So you can't control things after the event, but you've also got what I believe is negative reporting. If it's a warehouse and there's no forklift trucks, I would state there are no forklift trucks in this warehouse. Rather than, oh, they haven't got it, I'll not report it, because you would typically expect there to be that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you go into all the details about trucks and how they're fired and so forth.
How does the fire risk safety in this country compare with other countries?
We are superior
Oh,
from what I've seen. Yeah, but it's like everything. We in this country take safety more serious than Europe. I mean, they're talking about our safety standards falling if we leave. Our safety standards are significantly higher than on the continent or in America or anywhere else. So yeah, I do not believe on the continent you have a requirement to do a fire risk assessment.
Why aren't sprinklers a norm rather than an exception?
There is a complete misunderstanding as to the cost of a sprinkler system, and an association I'm part of retrofitted sprinklers in a building called Callow Mount in Sheffield to show that they could be fitted quite simply. It cost £1,000 per unit, and it's just ignorance. I've been in with architects, oh, we can't afford it, you know, we don't want them, they're not necessary, they cost too much. I said, well, have you got a price? Have you actually costed it? And they said, well, no, but we know. I said, hold on, get a price, see how much it's going to cost. And we proved with Callow Mount, we retrofitted those sprinkler systems, and the residents said it's fantastic, we feel so much at ease. But, you know, I said we weren't going to go talk about Grenfell, but the thing that I find frustrating is when you have a situation like that, you've got to take a total view. And we have the cladding, which, yes, is one thing, But at the other side, who's taken any action about the fridge that exploded? I mean, I don't know, a few years ago, when they took CFCs out, they replaced them with butane. And was that a fridge that had butane? Butane's a highly flammable liquid. 1 unit of butane gives you 13,000 times of flammable gas. Because the liquid to gas, I think the expansion ratio is something like 320. So that's liquid to the gaseous phase. The explosive range is 2% in air. So you multiply 50 by that and you get to the figure. So nobody's actually taken any notice of what actually caused the fire. The fridge, the white goods. And
so
the
after Grenfell Tower, are you going to be busier? Do you think it's raised the awareness of people that they do need to have these fire risk assessments?
It certainly has raised the awareness, and it certainly put sprinklers on the map. And one thing which I'm intrigued about, if you've got a building that's higher than 30 metres, you have got to have what we call a pressurised fire main that goes up through the building. And I'd be intrigued to see at Grenfell if they have a pressurised fire main. Now, my argument is that if you've got a pressurised fire main going up the building, why not just tap sprinkler systems into it? I mean, for a residential occupancy, you can use plastic pipe. And that is just plastic pipe, plastic fittings.
Yeah, it's straightforward.
Yeah, a little bit of glue, stick them together, job done. It's simple, not complicated.
But likely in accommodation like that, the sprinkler system will be tripped by vandals on a regular basis and then cause flood damage.
If
Because the little oiks will do that, surely.
you're correct, you're correct, but in reality, that very rarely happens.
Okay.
Because if you have a sprinkler system and you decide to vandalise it, you're going to get drenched.
Yeah.
You're going to get soaked, and it's going to look around at everybody and say, who set that off? Wasn't me. I'm not the one who's wet. Or my shoes are filled with water. Yes, and for that reason, people say to me, why do you put sprinklers in toilets in schools? Because the little kiddies just like to set light to toilet rolls.